She held his gaze, a smirk playing on her lips, a finger pointed, almost daring him to erupt into one of his familiar outbursts. The thought that he was her childhood friend seemed to fill her with an inexplicable disdain. And in that precise, harrowing moment, something profound shifted within him, a hidden spring deep in his soul finally, irrevocably snapping. This, you must understand, is not a narrative about just any young woman. Takashi Ryua currently stands as one of the nation's most celebrated idols, a figure of immense public adoration. Yet her influence extends far beyond the stage. She is also the granddaughter of Takashi Tao, the formidable chairman of the Taken Group, Japan's dominant corporate giant. This lineage grants her a wealth and power that eclipses virtually anyone else her age, effectively making her a true, living princess in every sense of the word. Our protagonist, however, Suzuki Kazuma, embodies a stark contrast. He is, by all accounts, an ordinary young man, gloomy, unassuming, and utterly devoid of companionship. More to the point, he finds himself entirely maidenless, a loner perpetually relegated to the lowest rung of the social hierarchy. His single defining characteristic, his solitary achievement, has always been his status as Ryua's childhood friend. For his entire life, believe it or not, he existed solely as Ryua's shadow, almost a quiet, ever-present attendant. But this was never his aspiration. He never craved the exceptional spotlight that followed Ryua. All he desired was something far simpler, a life filled with genuine connections, friends, perhaps a girlfriend, and the quiet dignity of a normal existence. This wasn't a sudden revelation. He had, in fact, tried to voice these very feelings to her. The outcome, regrettably, was far from what he hoped. With venom lacing her every syllable, she had dismissed his desires as foolish, demanding he remember his place as the worthless, gloomy loser he was. His only value, she had insisted, lay in being her childhood friend, nothing more, nothing less. That singular role, she argued, had exhausted all his life's potential, a stark truth he needed to hammer into his thick skull. Her words, echoing through his mind, "Know your place." A refrain she had repeated countless times over the years weighed on him like an inescapable curse. Yet, even beneath that oppressive burden, his yearning for a normal life persisted. It was in the spring of his first year in high school when, sitting at his desk at home, he received a message from Ryua herself. She requested his presence at the station the following day at 3 in the afternoon. It seemed Ryua, along with some other friends, had planned a karaoke outing, and she was inviting him along. He surmised that the person mentioned was likely Hiiragi Ayaka, a strikingly flashy girl from school whom, oddly enough, he had never once spoken to. Puzzled, he wondered why he, of all people, was being included. As if answering his unspoken thoughts, Ryua's message referenced his past desire for friends, and more significantly, for a girlfriend, explicitly encouraging him that joining an elite group like theirs would be the ideal path. His eyes, perhaps foolishly, gleamed at the prospect. He truly believed this was his chance, a desperate opportunity to finally change. He dressed with meticulous care, even visiting a barber to achieve a fashionable fade. The moment of truth had arrived. As his hand met the doorknob, he thought to himself, to truly become a new version of himself, to finally transform. The room beyond the door erupted in a wave of laughter, mocking him for actually appearing. How utterly gross they found him. They even ridiculed his freshly acquired fade, remarking that he still smelled of the hair salon. His brand new jacket, too, became a target for their derision. All the while, Ryua laughed the loudest, mockingly telling them to stop, claiming he had truly tried his best. Only Ayaka, her friend, sat quietly, seemingly unamused. Kazuma stood there in silence. Not a single word escaped his lips. As the cacophony of laughter washed over him, he understood. It had all been a meticulously orchestrated trap. Ryua rose to her feet, asking what was wrong, why he stood there so awkwardly. She urged him on, begging him to cry in front of everyone, for she had wagered 10,000 yen that he would. Ignoring her cruel plea, he whispered, requesting she answer just one question: had he done something wrong? He desperately needed to know what he had done to deserve such treatment. With that familiar, devilish smile, she answered that it was obvious. simply because he was her slave. She then commanded him to struggle, to put on a good show for her entertainment. And then, it happened. She finally confessed the truth, admitting that all this time, she couldn't bear the thought of him being her childhood friend. Kazuma's eyes widened. It felt as though something within him had finally fractured, as if long-held chains were snapping, allowing him to hear the resonant sound of a bond irrevocably shattered. This was, unequivocally, his breaking point. With eyes that had suddenly gone dead and soulless, he looked straight through her, stating that he felt precisely the same way. It was time to sever their ties. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Infuriated, she demanded to know what he thought he was saying. A loser like him, she declared, had no right to talk back to her. But Kazuma was right. She was, after all, the one complaining. She continued her verbal assault, warning him not to trifle with her, asserting that, unlike him, she possessed every right to hate him. Yet, Kazuma was past caring. He clenched his fist and, with a sudden surge of raw rage, slammed it clean through the table. As if the act meant nothing to him, he turned, facing the door before him, finally declaring that it was settled. He then closed the door behind him. Ryua's entourage stood in stunned silence, remarking on how lame Kazuma was and assuring her she shouldn't trouble herself over him. Meanwhile, her friend Ayaka made an astute observation, asking if he had truly broken the table. As they gathered around the splintered wood, they were met with denial and disbelief. How could a mere human possibly accomplish such a feat? Ryua, standing at a distance, trembled with rage, unable to comprehend how a sliver of her carefully constructed confidence could be shattered by someone like him. Remaining rooted to the spot, she screamed that she would never forgive him for ending their friendship. Kazuma, on the other hand, found the entire experience unexpectedly refreshing. The world itself seemed to glow with a newfound clarity. He pondered why he had allowed her to control him for so long. He realized he would much rather face high school alone than surrender his spirit to a beast cloaked in human skin. Deciding to move forward, no longer living in her shadow, Kazuma finally felt truly free. That very same night, we catch our first glimpse of the man who orchestrates the mighty Taken group from behind the scenes, Takashi Tao. With a stern, unyielding demeanor, he scrutinizes the documents before him. But his entire disposition softens the moment Ryua calls out to him from a distance. She begins to recount how Kazuma had been mean to her today, threatening to end their friendship. Her statement, however, captures the attention of the elegant woman standing idly in the room. Ryua's cousin, Takashi Kikura, turns in disbelief, asking if her story is true. Ryua confirms her suspicion, reiterating that she herself could scarcely believe it, as she had never imagined Kazuma would dare oppose her until now. Still unconvinced, Kikura suggests that perhaps Ryua herself might have uttered something unpleasant. Ryua casually admits to calling him her slave, and yes, perhaps she did say that being his childhood friend was the worst. But by then, they had already surmised as much. It was only natural for him to be upset after such words. Yet, Ryua doubles down, insisting she was only teasing him. A palpable jealousy begins to surface as she confesses her fury at the sight of Kazuma trying to make friends and seeking a girlfriend. The very notion, to her, is utterly ridiculous. Kikura, however, points out that wanting more friends is, in fact, quite normal. But Ryua vehemently denies it, screaming that it isn't so. After all, Kazuma always had her. The world's cutest Ryua was always by his side, yet the mere thought of him desiring closeness with another girl was unthinkable. And because of that, she believed it was only natural to tease him about it, asserting that in the entire world, she was the one who understood him most deeply. Because, you see, she loves him. And that was all Gramps needed to hear to shift his allegiance, declaring that it was, indeed, Kazuma's fault. Kikura, however, seemed to be the only one convinced Ryua was in the wrong and gently urged her to apologize. But Ryua stubbornly rebutted, suggesting that since her cousin had once been Kazuma's mentor, she could surely figure something out and make things right by having him apologize and confess his love. And while he was at it, to add a kiss as well. Kikura could barely believe the audacity. She then directed her focus to her uncle, asking if he had intended for Kazuma to marry Ryua. He confirmed that he did, explaining that it was precisely why he had arranged for Kakura to teach him martial arts, as well as the arts of leadership. Furthermore, Ryua harbored genuine affection for him, and a talent like his was truly one of a kind. Gazing at her fan, Kakura agreed, claiming she had never encountered anyone quite like him. From elementary school onwards, his grades consistently hovered around 3 out of 5 purposely, just a little above average, all in an effort to blend in. All of this, you see, was part of his training to become Ryua's discreet shadow. But Kakura understood something deeper. If he were ever to stop, if he chose to aim higher, the ripple effect would not just shake the school or the country, but the entire world. And if our protagonist wasn't already suffering from the pressures of success, it turns out he had always been immensely popular with girls. Kakura confessed she couldn't even count how many had transferred out of school because of their feelings for him. As a result, he had never truly comprehended the extent of his own popularity. Hearing this, Ryua stood tall with pride, asserting that, after all, that's her Kazuma. Chairman Takashi, meanwhile, remarked that this was precisely why he was a worthy candidate to eventually take over his company. But Kakura saw much further. Now that he had severed ties with Ryua, he no longer needed to restrain himself. She couldn't help but anticipate the moment when everything would inevitably spiral out of control. And it began the very next day. The halls of Teie Academy buzzed with an unspoken tension. Right in the center of the corridor sat a solitary desk and chair, unmistakably belonging to Kazuma. The message was unmistakable. He had defied Ryua, and this was his punishment. Of course, the ultra-rich heiress would stoop to such tactics, merely to underscore the cruel, spoiled human being she truly was. Still, he refused to let it unnerve him. Instead, he calmly weighed his options. Option 1, drag the desk back to class and endure the ensuing ridicule. Option 2, complain to the staff. But that, he knew, would be futile, as the school itself literally belonged to her grandfather, the chairman of the Teie Group. You see, Teie Academy isn't just any school. It's an institution dedicated to cultivating S-class talent, where elite students from across the nation are recruited under scholarship programs to excel in sports, arts, and academics. You name it, if you are exceptional, you pay not a single yen. But make no mistake, this place operates on a strict hierarchy, a real-life caste system, complete with defined upper and lower ranks. And seated at the very pinnacle, on a self-proclaimed throne, was Ryua, the princess herself. So, yes, option 2 was swiftly dismissed. Instead, Kazuma did something utterly unexpected. He grabbed his pen and swiftly scribbled a message on the paper taped to the chair. He stated that he would be studying on his own, and since it was a direct message from Princess Ryua herself, they should please count him as present. Surprised by this 200 IQ maneuver, the other students stood in shock as Kazuma decided to depart for another location. He also considered how problematic it would be if others discovered this clandestine spot. Upon his arrival, he revealed it to be an underground library, known only to himself and a select few others, as most students and even some teachers were unaware of its very existence. As a regular, the senior member of the library committee occasionally granted him entry. Descending the stairs towards the door, he thought about how he would simply pass the time until classes concluded. He mused on his lifelong desire for an ordinary existence, but now that he had openly defied Ryua, he doubted he would be able to make many friends, let alone find a girlfriend. As he gripped the doorknob, he wished simply to live quietly, on his own terms. Opening the door before him, all he saw were stacks upon stacks of books. And in that moment, Kazuma had no idea of the extraordinary story about to unfold before him, as his quest for an ordinary life was now destined to be filled with extraordinary girls, ensuring his days would be anything but peaceful. With countless eyes watching, a single girl ignited a new kind of chaos. The seemingly sweet, yet conniving, Ryua began her live stream on a channel boasting over 191,000 subscribers. Today, she was there to vent about someone who had recently provoked her. Just the other day, she recounted, she had gone out for karaoke with a few girls from her class. Apparently, someone in Ryua's karaoke group had decided to completely kill the vibe mid-session and simply left halfway through. Tragic, indeed. Ryua leaned in close to address her legions of subscribers, whom she affectionately termed her loyal subjects, urging them to listen carefully. If the party is vibrant, they should never be the one to disrupt it. Oh, and lastly, she had some monumental news. She announced a brand new gig, a collaboration with a new voice actress named Mato Amune. They were not only signed to the same agency, but also attended the same school. Their debut CD was slated to drop soon, and their first live event was scheduled for the following Sunday at the Shine Mall. With that, Ryua signed off, as thousands flooded the comments with admiration and support. But returning to the present, Kazuma, now standing awkwardly before a door he perhaps should not have opened, lowered his gaze and apologized for his earlier intrusion. The young lady inside, clearly startled moments before, bowed her head slightly, introducing herself as Amune Mato, while also apologizing for raising her voice so loudly. Our protagonist, feeling a pang of guilt for barging in, admitted he should have knocked, asking if she, too, had heard about this secret spot from the head of the library committee. When she confirmed, he realized he wasn't alone in his discovery and decided to wait outside, allowing Amune the opportunity to change. A few minutes later, Amune opened the door and gently invited him back in, still apologizing for the wait. But Kazuma couldn't help but voice the burning question on his mind. Why was she changing in there? And why, in her gym clothes, no less? Amune explained that she was simply seeking a quiet place to rehearse her singing and dancing. As it turned out, she was a voice actress, preparing for a significant upcoming event. That's when the realization struck him. She was from the entertainment world, just like Ryua, another elite talent handpicked by the academy. He glanced around and noticed an oversized mirror Amune had brought with her, clear evidence of her dedication. But it also piqued his curiosity. Why wasn't she in class? Amune's eyes dropped. Since that morning, upon arriving at school, she had found her desk and chair placed in the hallway, accompanied by a sign that starkly read, "No seat for you." Kazuma froze. He had heard this before. The orchestrated setup, the public humiliation. Suddenly, her teary eyes from earlier made perfect, painful sense. Just then, his phone buzzed with a new message. No, multiple messages, all from Ryua. She was demanding to know his whereabouts. Worse yet, she was asking if he had seen her newest video, threatening to reveal his name in her next live stream and incite her fans to hunt him down. Unless, of course, he brought his pathetic little desk back into class and begged. Just by the look in his eyes, you could tell he was utterly disgusted. Kazuma refocused his attention on Amune, still puzzled. If she truly was one of Teikai's special scholarship students, then why was she enduring all this effort? Yet, despite being a voice actress, Amune was far from popular. And according to her, she knew precisely why. It was her face and her voice. But of course, our protagonist couldn't let her speak about herself in such a way. He had to delve deep into his mental archives, remarking that he couldn't properly see her face because of all her bangs, but he thought her voice was quite cute. And just look at her face, he had her blushing. But to her, it was absolutely untrue. She explained that countless others possessed superior voices, and compared to Takashi Ryua, she was nothing. Even so, someone like her had ended up forming a unit with Ryua, which might just explain the harassment she had been receiving lately. During Ryua's live stream yesterday, Amune had been inundated with a flood of cruel comments. Remarks like, if Ryua teams up with someone like that, then her reputation is doomed. Harsh words from Ryua's fans, but birds of a feather often flock together. This begged the question, though, why was she even deciding to team up with that person anyway? Amune couldn't believe what she had just heard, warning him that he couldn't simply call her that. If someone at school heard him bad-mouthing Ryua, it would spell serious trouble. But since it was just the two of them, he allowed his intrusive thoughts to run wild. Amune confessed that it wasn't her decision to make in the first place, but rather the agency's. Since she was perceived as plain and gloomy, they thought she would make the perfect supporting role, a quiet backdrop to Ryua's dazzling spotlight. Cruel, yes, but that was just Teikai music for you. They would do anything to promote Ryua. And goodness, how many companies did these people own? Kazuma didn't doubt that the entire desk and chair situation was Ryua's idea. And even though it was the agency's plan to pair the two, Ryua probably couldn't stand the thought of being partnered with someone she deemed beneath her. And before he could even complete his thought, she stopped him. She was perfectly fine with being her background support, she explained, as it was a rare opportunity she had been given. So, at the very least, she didn't want to drag anyone down. Instead, she intended to give it everything she had. And her words resonated with him, deeply moving him to his core. He asked if that was her reason for coming to the library to practice. And when she gave a resounding yes, he couldn't help but smile to himself, admiring how incredibly cool she seemed to him. With that, he offered to keep her company. Though, to be completely honest, all he could truly offer was feedback from the perspective of a complete amateur. He asked if that would be acceptable to her. Before he could even finish, Amyun's eyes lit up. She gently took his hand and smiled, telling him that from now on she was counting on him. And for a moment, seeing her up close like this, Kazuma realized something profound. This girl was far cuter than that person Ryua could ever hope to be. Time seemed to fly, and before they knew it, it was already lunchtime. Amyun had been practicing non-stop since morning. Kazuma began to worry she might be dehydrated when suddenly, from down the hallway, an obnoxious voice yelled his name. And right behind him was none other than the witch herself, Ryua. She demanded to know where on earth he had been all this time. You could just tell by his expression. He absolutely did not want to be there. Her verbal barrage continued as she pressed Kazuma, asking why he was ignoring her. She even noticed he had blocked her on Messenger. But then, with a touch of delusion, she thought to herself that perhaps he couldn't look directly at her because of her overwhelming beauty. But he walked right past them, as if they weren't even there. That's when a male figure grabbed his shoulder, demanding to know what was up with his silent treatment. And all it took was one penetrating look for Kazuma to instantly decipher this man's entire character profile, much like a seasoned detective. Because of that, we now know this individual's name is Asano, the baseball club's promising scholarship student. Kazuma surmised that this individual must be quite a slacker to be loitering with Ryua instead of practicing. Frankly, he should take a page from Amyun's book. But gazing at him for too long caused Kazuma's blood to boil, especially given Asano's silent defiance. So, he pulled back his fist, ready to strike. And goodness, he must have possessed some sort of primal instinct. Asano found himself wondering if he was merely punching air, but Kazuma intended to deliver a forceful blow. Asano was staring death itself in the eyes. He was utterly baffled. When had Kazuma gotten behind him? Now he looked like a fool for having missed. They wondered if he was weak or something. And indeed, Kazuma seemed to enjoy the moment, asking Asano if he was out of shape. Just as Asano was about to try again, Ryua stopped him dead in his tracks. The only one permitted to seriously mess with Kazuma was her, and they would only get a chance if she granted them permission. Otherwise, no one should lay a finger on him, and he should know his place. And just like that, the entire corridor fell silent. Kazuma finally looked at her for the first time during their entire exchange, and you could tell she had been waiting for this all day. But instead of reacting as she hoped, he called her out, asking if she truly thought she had done something cool just now. Instead, he decided to set things straight himself, declaring that absolutely no one was allowed to mess with him. Because he didn't care who they were, he simply wanted them to leave him alone. Ryua collapsed to her knees, her eyes shimmering, her heart pounding. She was utterly smit. That line, that unwavering confidence, it struck her like a Cupid's arrow fired from a bazooka. To her, Kazuma had never looked cooler. A full week had passed, and the remarkable Amyun seemed to be working diligently. But mid-practice, she spun too fast and nearly collapsed. That's when Kazuma swooped in, catching her just before she hit the floor. She apologized, explaining she kept stumbling, but he reassured her not to worry, as he wouldn't want her getting hurt before the actual event. Starstruck, Amyun couldn't help but marvel at how incredible Kazuma was. He could be all the way across the room, but the instant she stumbled, he was there to catch her. He, of course, tried to play it off, like he wasn't some real-life guardian angel. But to her, it wasn't true, Ever since that day, he had been watching over her and encouraging her, not realizing just how much it had helped her. And once again, she simply wanted to thank him. You could tell from his expression. No one had ever said anything quite like that to him before. But yet again, he tried to deny it. As if nothing significant had happened, he redirected his focus to her performance, suggesting it might be better to simply walk back to center stage instead of executing a spin, given how she always seemed to lose her balance when she did. But to her, it simply wouldn't look its best that way. So instead, Kazuma recommended jumping back in one fluid motion, explaining that if she leveraged the strength in her knees, she would, of course, be able to casually flip in the air. Was he now suggesting backflips to conquer the stage? What was he even talking about? She thought, see, like this, as he demonstrated. You better sit down. And of course, something like this was utterly impossible for her. But more importantly, what on earth was that? And she was right, normal people simply couldn't do that. Also, his grades must be phenomenal. But no, because ever since elementary school, he had only ever scored just above average. Changing the topic once more, Kazuma observed that her posture seemed a bit off. But no matter how diligently she tried, she had never been able to correct her slouch. As usual, he put his keen mind to good use, suggesting that perhaps she should embrace that slouch, mimicking something endearing, like a purring cat. And she simply went along with it, striking all the right poses and angles, radiating a cuteness he could barely handle. And it seemed that, somehow, it was finally clicking for her. Kazuma recommended having her designer create cat ears and a tail to complement her outfit. She was fully on board until she wasn't. She wouldn't be able to use it for her performance with Ryua, she explained, as it simply wouldn't match, alongside the fact that she was supposed to be a background support. Kazuma paused for a moment before asking if that was truly acceptable to her. But since singing and dancing weren't necessarily her specialty, she confessed she would actually prefer he watched her practice acting instead. After all, she was a voice actress. She yearned to perform as an anime character, and that's why she was pouring her heart into it now, hoping it would lead to other opportunities one day. Kazuma couldn't help but observe how remarkably positive she was, especially when speaking about voice acting. She seemed so utterly full of life. He confessed how envious he felt, as he seemed to possess no dreams or goals to aspire towards. When she asked if there wasn't anything he wanted to become, the only thought that came to his mind was that he wished to be ordinary, a life he could proudly proclaim as his own. And even then, she believed in him, expressing no doubt that if it were him, he could achieve the very thing he desired. And that was all he needed to hear, as he smiled in appreciation for her kind words. Feeling a newfound closeness, MAnwha seized the opportunity to ask a more personal question. Since the other day, she had heard that he had gotten into a fight with Ryua and wondered if perhaps it was because of her. He reassured her that this wasn't the case. But persistent, she mentioned how they were childhood friends and how she must be putting him in a difficult position. Yet he clarified that he no longer considered Ryua a childhood friend, and that was all she needed to hear. She steeled herself to make a confession. She stuttered at first, but proceeded to ask if perhaps he would like to, and the witch herself appeared on the scene, demanding to know what on earth the two of them were doing in such a cramped space. As she prepared to unleash her fury, all hell broke loose as Ryua burst into the secret library. She had heard Kazuma was there, but she hadn't expected him to be with someone. She furiously asked why he was with this trash voice actress in the first place, asserting that MAnwha was nowhere near as popular as she was. And just like that, the insults began to fly, calling MAnwha literal crap and stupid. Ryua finally pieced it all together. This was why Kazuma had been slipping away after school. It was all because he had been meeting up with some girl. And the mere thought of it was enough to bring her to tears. But who, you might wonder, was going to tell her that no one cared? She wasn't letting it go, though, because Kazuma, she believed, belonged by her side. MAnwha, attempting to de-escalate the situation, took all the blame upon herself, saying Kazuma was just helping her out. But the moment she uttered his first name, Ryua's ears twitched. She stormed over, grabbed MAnwha by the collar, and pulled her close, demanding to know who on earth had given her permission to call him by his first name. Instead, she ordered MAnwha to know her place and call him Suzuki instead, asserting that getting close to Kazuma to Ryua, MAnwha was a million years too soon for that. She even went as far as to bet that beneath those bangs of hers, MAnwha would be ugly. But goodness, was she wrong. Just look at those eyes. It was almost as if someone had delivered a gut punch to Ryua. She asked if MAnwha had shown Kazuma that cute face beneath her bangs and immediately produced duct tape from who knows where to slap those bangs back into place. But having had enough, Kazuma called out to her, demanding she cut it out. Weren't the two of them, after all, supposed to be part of some group? And though he might be right, Ryua dismissed it, thinking MAnwha was just a supporting role anyway, so she could treat her however she pleased. But Kazuma wasn't having it. That so-called sidekick of hers had been training every single day just to hold her own against Ryua, so Ryua shouldn't get in her way. But his actions only confused Ryua. Why was he taking MAnwha's side when they were clearly childhood friends? Kazuma thought differently, asserting he stood by those who worked hard. He had to reiterate to her again, they were not childhood friends. Was she deaf? And she could feel his sheer bloodlust seeping through his skin. She struggled to get her words out at first, asking if he was still angry about the other day, claiming what she said was just a joke. And he was confused. A joke? She had subtly traumatized him. And how many others had she hurt with her so-called jokes? She was in high school. She needed to grow up and discern the difference between what was acceptable and what was not. Indeed, she was the one who needed to know her place. His words left her visibly shaking. Without waiting for a response, Kazuma turned, walking right past her, signaling to MAnwha that they should leave. But turning to face him, Ryua declared that she was far cuter than MAnwha, and there was no way she would lose to some trash-tier voice actress like her. And before she knew it, they were already out the door. Outside, MAnwha lowered her gaze, apologizing, thinking it might have been her fault that Ryua got upset. But Kazuma reassured her that she didn't need to apologize, as it had just given him a brilliant idea. They might be able to throw Ryua off balance, he thought, if they poked at her oversized pride. He was calling it the MAnwha dance operation. After a brief browse at a nearby convenience store, Kazuma handed MAnwha a charming black cat ear pin and asked if she happened to have a YouTube channel, requesting that she wear it and upload her most recent cat dance. He was confident it would capture people's attention. But MAnwha, much like many new creators, had barely any subscribers and doubted her video would garner any notice. Kazuma put her mind at ease, explaining he had a plan to help with that. His only request was that she trust him. His confidence was enough to calm her nerves, and after a brief pause, she nodded. But Kazuma wasn't finished. He asked if she would be comfortable lifting her bangs when she recorded the video, remarking that she was genuinely cute. But the mere thought of other people looking at her face made her anxious, and hiding behind her bangs helped her to relax. Curious, Kazuma asked if her agency had ever mentioned anything about it. But it also made sense why they wouldn't, as her appearance suited the support role image they were cultivating. Kazuma, piecing things together, suspected that was probably their plan all along. They should have gone solo from the start, but as it turned out, that was the plan. After the upcoming event, the group was disbanding. MAnwha stated it as if it were no big deal, but Kazuma couldn't conceal his disgust, thinking how dirty the showbiz world must be. MAnwha, however, saw it as only natural, given that the agency was owned by Ryua's grandfather. Of course, they would favor Ryua more. Plus, when it came to popularity and beauty, she believed Ryua was far out of her league. And because of that, she wondered if challenging someone with Ryua's power and status was truly advisable. Hearing that, Kazuma finally understood. Her lack of confidence wasn't some inherent character flaw. It was a consequence of her environment, nurtured by an industry that systematically suppresses anyone who stands out too much. Whether in school or showbiz, MAnwha had always been surrounded by people too afraid to lose their position, individuals who would tear down others just to maintain their own standing. No wonder MAnwha's confidence was so low. Calling out to him using his last name, MAnwha asked if he was childhood friends with Ryua and how Ryua seemed to like him a lot. But to Kazuma, it was just annoying at this point. He also wanted to let her know that it was perfectly fine for her to call him Kazuma instead. MAnwha lit up, glowing with excitement. She mentioned that it would make her truly happy if he called her MAnwha as well. And look at him, he did it effortlessly. And why was she blushing? She had just told him he could call her that. With her newfound determination, she looked up, mentioning that she would do her best for the upcoming video shoot. And before anyone could blink, the video was live. A bright, chirpy MAnwha introduced herself as the voice actress, performing the MAnwha dance on a channel with 41 subscribers. Then she danced. And not just any dance. We're talking backflips, perhaps the very move Kazuma had taught her previously. At the end, a little breathless, MAnwha returned to the camera, announcing that she would be performing live this Sunday and inviting anyone watching who was free to stop by. She also made sure to ask everyone watching to subscribe. Watching from his phone, Kazuma couldn't help but think how truly cute her entire performance was. Yet, he did notice she had received a few hate comments from Ryua's fans, but among them were some genuine viewers. He decided to check Ryua's channel in that moment, not out of any lingering affection for her, but solely for gathering intelligence. And this girl was completely losing her mind, calling everyone every name under the sun, except for Kazuma's real name, which, to him, rendered her prior threat about having her fans hunt him down nothing more than a bluff. But since then, she had actually managed to grow to 1.1 million subscribers, yet she continued to rage over Kazuma, not noticing how amazing she was. With that, she brought her frenzied session to a close, revealing the fake, warm, and bubbly persona she displayed online, claiming that what they had just witnessed was merely emotional expression acting, as she was simply channeling some of her recent frustration, musing that perhaps she, too, should venture into acting. With that, she signed off, leaving Kazuma to wonder what on earth he had just watched. But even then, he was more determined than ever. If that's how she wanted to play, then he would crush her without holding back. Unfortunately for them, Ryua's video quickly amassed over 20,000 views in just 3 hours. MAnwha, on the other hand, was only sitting at around 52 views in 2 hours. Still, the cuteness from MAnwha's video was, in his opinion, truly exceptional, meaning all that remained was for people to simply see it. And Kazuma knew exactly how he was going to help her out. You see, before you stands the introverted Kazuma Suzuki, and though he remains gloomy and unassuming with no friends to his name in the real world, online, the situation is quite different. In a certain mobile game he plays, he is, in fact, the vice leader of a rather large clan. And all it took were a mere few days for MAnwha's video to hit over 500,000 views. She was utterly surprised, as it had only been 3 days, wondering what exactly Kazuma had done during that time. But for him, he claimed he had only helped spread the word around a little. But most importantly, if the video hadn't been truly great, then it simply wouldn't have gone viral. So, it was truly all thanks to MAnwha's hard work and talent that she had achieved this. And just hearing that made her incredibly happy. She even mentioned running into someone just then who told her they were coming to her event. But MAnwha wasn't the only one who had been promoting. Ryua had posters plastered everywhere. But to Kazuma, all that remained was for Ryua to take the bait. And goodness, did she latch onto his hook, he had reeled her right in. And of course, Ryua was not at all surprised. MAnwha, on the other hand, seemed shocked that Ryua was wearing cat ears. But getting straight to the point, Ryua mentioned that she had seen their little video. But she was convinced that MAnwha had no chance of beating her, asserting that this Sunday would be the cat ear showdown, letting everyone know exactly who was the cutest and most popular one around. But Kazuma already knew she would go there. It had been his plan all along. Yet, he saw right through her, just from the subtle twitch at the corner of her lips. He knew she wasn't truly confident, and with everything meticulously in place, it was now time for Kazuma to unleash his decisive strike. On the day of the event, Kazuma arrived early to show his support for MAnwha, but he wondered why she was standing by another door when her dressing room was in the opposite direction. Apparently, Ryua had instructed her manager to remove MAnwha, as she didn't want to breathe the same air as a nobody. So instead, MAnwha had decided to make camp in a nearby storage room. But ever the optimist, Kazuma thought that perhaps this might be a good thing, as now they wouldn't be disturbed. He mentioned that it would be showtime soon and offered encouragement, telling her he knew she had this. He had been watching over her this entire time, and he knew she had improved tremendously. Not quite convinced, however, MAnwha asked why he was willing to go so far for someone like her, as she had been pondering it all this time. But it seemed to be a much simpler matter for Kazuma. He felt as if their school was suffocating, always favoring its scholarship students. He knew it happened everywhere, but the way the lower-class students were treated was far too obvious. But if someone like MAnwha, who wasn't a scholarship student, could truly shine, he genuinely believed it could carve an opening in the formidable wall their school had constructed. But to be honest, that wasn't his primary reason, because ever since he witnessed how diligently MAnwha was striving, he desperately wanted to cheer her on. Reaching into his bag, he remembered that he wanted to give her a custom-made cat ear accessory. He had wanted to find something that would truly suit her, and decided that perhaps it would be best to simply craft it himself. Taking it in hand, she thanked him again, mentioning that it made her truly happy, reassuring him that she would do her absolute best. But that wasn't exactly how it was supposed to be worn. And while placing his hand gently on her face, he moved her bangs to the side, letting her know that this was how she should wear it, smiling as he figured that it would look magnificent on her. MAnwha's entire face turned crimson, unable to utter a proper word. But Kazuma recalled a recent time when he was invited out for karaoke and decided to visit the salon for a stylish fade. How he had felt like a completely different person. That's how it usually unfolds in stories, but not for him, as they had all simply pointed and laughed. But she was different. MAnwha's motto was someone who could genuinely shine. She possessed grand dreams, and she had worked so incredibly hard. Their moment, however, was interrupted by someone knocking on the door, signaling that she was up next. And so, reaching out his hand, Kazuma urged her to go and capture every single one of Ryua's fans. And grabbing onto it, she rushed towards the door, prepared to deliver the performance of a lifetime. The event commenced, and Ryua stepped forward to thank everyone for their attendance. Standing before the eager crowd was everyone's favorite idol, the princess herself. The audience buzzed with excitement, especially upon seeing Ryua looking extra adorable with cat ears perched on her head. Today, she was there to debut her new unit, Princess Royale and the Happy Servant. But speaking of her happy servant, Ryua realized she had forgotten to introduce her partner, the one who would actually be singing alongside her today, Minato MAnwha. With a bright smile, MAnwha introduced herself and kindly asked the audience to support their new unit. Ryua's eyes widened when she caught the murmurs rippling through the crowd. How cute, they thought, MAnwha looked. She couldn't quite wrap her head around it. After all MAnwha had done was push her bangs up a little. But none of that truly mattered, since when it came to singing and dancing, Ryua believed she was clearly the superior idol. And if that was the case, it was time to get the show started with their first song, Cute Dreamers. As the music began and their voices filled the arena, the whispers returned, but this time they were all about MAnwha. The crowd wondered, who was this charming girl beside their princess? And had someone this cute ever appeared on television before? Wasn't MAnwha far cuter than Ryua? Even her singing and dancing seemed to outshine Ryua too, and in that moment, Ryua could feel it. She was beginning to sweat from the immense pressure. To Kazuma, watching from above the stage, Ryua had already lost. She must have thought that opening with her singing and dancing would guarantee her victory. But while Ryua was busy merely playing the idol, MAnwha had been practicing day and night, refining her performance until she shone with a dazzling, authentic charm. By the time the curtain rose, the battle was already over. Blinded by jealousy of the lower-class girl who had gone viral with her cat ears, Ryua had foolishly stepped into MAnwha's world, playing by her rules, just as Kazuma had once been forced to do. And now, Ryua was about to experience the same crushing embarrassment he had felt back then. Kazuma then noticed something unusual: men in black suits weaving through the audience, making their way towards the back of the stage. He slipped away, cutting through the section marked "No Entry," determined to uncover what was happening. We then focus on one of the suited men, frustrated that he hadn't been able to reach any of his teammates. He was running out of time, especially since the song was almost over. He decided he would have to drag MAnwha off the stage himself. But Kazuma was not about to let that slide, asking who exactly this man thought he was about to manhandle. The man, too focused on his mission, didn't even notice his fallen comrades lying behind him. He demanded to know exactly what had happened. But Kazuma was the one asking the questions here. He quickly discerned that this man was part of the Takashiki family's security detail, and if MAnwha failed to deliver as a supporting act, they had been ordered to remove her immediately. Once Kazuma confirmed this, he moved in an instant, too fast for the man's eye to follow. And with a single, precise strike, the man crumbled to the floor. It seemed that their security had grown sloppy lately. Wasting no time, he slipped back towards the arena, relieved that, at least for now, everything seemed to have worked out. To Kazuma, this was MAnwha's momentous opportunity, the one she had fought so hard for, and he absolutely refused to let anyone ruin it. But then it struck him, even if they had managed to drag her off stage, it wouldn't have mattered. Everyone present had already been profoundly moved by her voice. MAnwha was finally shining, and no one could stop her. Taking a deep breath, Kazuma cupped his hands and shouted that she could do it. The sound of his voice filled MAnwha with a burst of fresh confidence, but on the other hand, it completely threw MAnwha off. She took one wrong step and almost broke her ankles, and before she knew it, she crashed, hitting the stage face first. And just like that, the event people would soon refer to as the fall of the idol MAnwha ended in MAnwha's decisive victory. By the next day, every major entertainment outlet was reporting on MAnwha's spectacular performance, carefully omitting any mention of her fall or MAnwha's stunning debut. But that was typical of Teikai music, dirty tricks and damage control, as usual. Still, in the age of social media, there was no containing the truth. MAnwha's fall was rapidly going viral everywhere, and MAnwha's name was on everyone's lips. MAnwha was showered with praise from every direction. And for Kazuma, that was enough. MAnwha was finally getting the attention she deserved, which, ironically, meant it would require far more effort for him to remain by her side. He knew for a fact that MAnwha was absolutely furious. The official news had ignored her blunder, but the clips and memes circulating all over the internet certainly did not. Meanwhile, MAnwha could no longer be ignored. At this rate, her star would only continue to ascend. And when it did, Kazuma knew his very existence would inevitably become an obstacle for MAnwha, the self-proclaimed ruler of the school. So, for now, he decided he would fade into the background, quietly observing MAnwha's success from afar. But just as he turned to leave, MAnwha's voice cut through the chatter. She weaved through the crowd until she finally caught up to him. She bowed, greeting him good morning. But she wasn't finished, because right after catching her breath, she asked if after school he would help her with practicing again. Kazuma was confused since the event was already over, but MAnwha explained that she had received a call for a new audition for an upcoming anime. Another agency had reached out to her directly, and she was contemplating leaving MAnwha's agency to pursue her dream of becoming a voice actress. And this time, she wanted to practice with Kazuma by her side. Just as he opened his mouth to respond, MAnwha pressed a finger to his lips. She didn't want him to call her MAnwha anymore. From now on, she said softly, only he was allowed to call her Amenen. The crowded hallway was filled with whispers, but before anyone else could react, MAnwha had broken her silence, demanding to know how dare MAnwha do that to her man. Kazuma noticed that ever since she had pushed her bangs up, MAnwha truly had changed. And maybe she was right, maybe it was his fault. He had been the one to give her this newfound confidence, after all. And leaning in closer, MAnwha whispered, asking if he planned on taking responsibility. And that, you see, was the final blow. MAnwha could only watch as her man was snatched away right before her eyes. She then fainted on the spot, while Asano, somewhere in the crowd, shouted for someone to call an ambulance. After MAnwha's event concluded, she swiftly rose to celebrity status. And true to form, she found herself incredibly busy every single day, having to balance both her burgeoning new career and her school obligations. Even that minor incident at the school entrance was enough to get people talking about her. As for Kazuma, well, he remained the mysterious loner who, somehow, was always surrounded by both Ryua and Amyun. At least, that's how everyone else perceived him. But to him, that was perfectly fine, as he was finally living out his days in relative peace. When suddenly, the laughter of a few classmates nearby caught his attention. Asano, it seemed, was trying his luck with Ayaka, claiming that if he could only date her, he'd be willing to risk everything. But she wasn't buying it, suggesting he was probably just saying that because he had been rejected by Ryua. And hadn't he been declaring his love for Amyun just a few months prior? To her, he was simply too desperate to find a girlfriend. And at this rate, she warned, no one would want him if he kept it up. And while everyone teased him for being such an open book, he insisted that he truly meant it. After all, Ayaka was truly pretty, a fashion leader, a top student, and the star of the dance club. So, of course, he genuinely wanted to date her. But all she did was laugh right in his face, dismissing it as a transparent pickup line. Besides, she already had a boyfriend. And Asano, once again, nearly died from yet another rejection. It seemed as if this was something everyone else already knew, as Ayaka was definitely the type of girl uninterested in guys who lacked a car or money. And Asano, our comrade, was clearly desperate, claiming he, too, had money, so he'd definitely be able to treat her to some tea. And that alone almost had her laughing in his face again, asking if he knew what she held in her hand. It was a new purse that had just been released this month, and her boyfriend had bought it for her without even inquiring about the price. So, if Asano had any plans to take his place, then he'd need to be able to buy tea 1,000 times over. And that's when he realized she was far beyond his budget and finally decided to let it go, acknowledging that she was all about her money and, of course, her looks. All the while, Kazuma sat across from them. They were known as the elite group, comprised of top-performing students. But Ayaka was specifically renowned for her beauty and fame, and she clearly had no problem shouting at the top of her lungs, either. But Kazuma couldn't help but notice that Ayaka just happened to be sitting on a desk that belonged to someone else. And taking a closer look, he noticed the young woman holding a book he had recently returned to the hidden library and figured she must have borrowed it. That thought alone brought him genuine happiness. He was glad it hadn't remained there, buried in dust forever. He knew it was a good book, and he could tell she truly wanted to sit down quickly to read it. And taking a moment, Kazuma decided to approach Ayaka and mentioned that wasn't an appropriate place to be sitting, asking her to move. At first, their eyes widened, but quickly turned into frustration, as how dare some loser try to act so buddy-buddy with her, mentioning how annoying he was. But Kazuma didn't give a damn. The bell was about to ring, so she should simply return to her seat. But she grew even louder, insisting there was still time. Plus, it was none of his business anyway. All the while, Kazuma thought about how stubborn she was, remembering her from when he had gone out for karaoke previously. She had given him a cold look back then as well, and it made him think that perhaps Ayaka actually hated him. But whether she hated him or not, he had no other choice. And scooping her up in his arms, he gently lifted her off the table, all while everyone stood there watching. And before long, her entire face had turned crimson. But Kazuma was unfazed, calling out to the young lady who needed her desk, stating that now would be the best time to make her move. And as she rushed in to clean the desk that Ayaka had occupied, she thanked him. With his objective completed, he gently lowered Ayaka's feet to the ground. She stood there with her head tilted down, silent, until suddenly she snapped. A flurry of embarrassment and frustration flared across her face as she warned him not to mess with her, while also curiously wondering what he was trying to accomplish just now, and decided to chastise him, demanding to know how he dared to do something like that to her. But just as she was about to continue, Ryua stepped into the room, cheerful and wishing everyone a good morning. And in an instant, the place fell silent, as if the one truly in charge had finally arrived. And as she approached Ayaka from behind, she whispered in her ear, asking what had happened and if, by any chance, Kazuma had done something to her. And not wanting to tangle with the clearly psychotic woman who would undoubtedly do anything for her man, Ayaka quietly mentioned that it was nothing. But Kazuma felt compelled to speak up, because how many times did he have to tell her that he didn't belong to her, but rather that they were just strangers now? Shocked, Ryua tilted her head down, asking why. Why did he keep saying such cruel things to her? As even back then, he kept siding with that garbage voice actress, even though she was clearly thinking of him the entire time. But for the last time, he stated that he only sided with those who worked hard and not with some lazy, arrogant individual like herself, and walked right back over to his seat. And since he had severed ties with Ryua, Kazuma could finally pursue the things he wanted to do as an ordinary high school student. And the first thing that came to his mind was finding his first part-time job. But he seemed unsure of what jobs would even suit him. There was this new maid and butler cafe that offered quite good pay. And now that he thought about it, back when he was in middle school, he had been compelled to live in Ryua's family mansion, having to learn how to clean and serve in preparation for his eventual service to their family. Sure, his new job might be a bit further than he would prefer, but if it was an actual cafe, then perhaps he would be able to put his experience to the test. And while inside the cafe, it didn't take long for him to be hired on the spot. And apparently, he would be starting next week. As Kazuma sat there, he was surprised it was that easy. But his employer mentioned how his demeanor seemed polite, so she was absolutely thrilled he had been able to come by. Sure, their space wasn't all that big. As a result, there were usually only 2 people serving at the front while she was normally in the kitchen, but he actually shouldn't worry because there was a very dependable senior who he could rely on. Plus, they were very easy to work with. And it was while he made his way to the back to meet his dependable senior that he hoped they would at least be nice. And right as he opened the door, introducing himself, the young lady in front of him couldn't believe it, dropping her broom in the process. She was unable to believe that their new part-time worker was actually Kazuma. All the while, somewhere else, Ryua thought back to what Kazuma had said. And while pasting images of them on the wall, she mentioned that she finally understood it now. He had been testing her love this entire time. From here on out, she would do her absolute best. Her furious eyes darted in his direction as she called out to him. She warned him not to tell anyone that she was doing this kind of job, wondering why, of all people, it had to be Kazuma. After all, she would never acknowledge him as her junior. But while Kazuma averted his gaze and looked elsewhere, she called out to him yet again, wanting to know if her secret would be safe with him. But desperate, she asked why he was so quiet. And when she couldn't take it anymore, she shouted that she knew working hard while dressed as a maid was a bit strange, and if he wanted to, he could just laugh already. But confused, Kazuma asked why, since there was nothing funny about a person working hard. And while she blushed uncontrollably, she exclaimed that someone like her didn't actually do much, and she only really took the job because the pay was good. But from the looks of it, Kazuma noticed her cleaning was actually pretty thorough, as both the glasses behind the chandelier and underneath the chairs and tables were done really well. Not to mention, the hard-to-see areas were actually pretty spotless. But yet again, she claimed that she hadn't done it, that maybe some small child did it instead. But if that were the case, then why did her hands look the way they did? Both her hands and knees were a bit dirty. And Kazuma wondered if perhaps she had been kneeling down to wipe the stains on the floor with a cloth, and then shortly after went over it with a mop. How truly amazing the work she had done was. And while she stared at him, she began to blush yet again, all while she gritted her teeth and shortly after shouted that he should just shut up already and instructed him to go on and change his clothes before they opened the cafe, since there was a lot she had to teach him before then. And as Kazuma stood there with a hopeful smile, he reassured her that he would do his best. It wasn't long after that the cafe was now open. And as Ayaka made her rounds, she began taking orders for meals and shortly after approached a family, apologizing as it seemed they were a bit packed for the day and recommended that they take a look at the menu while she tried to sort out their seating arrangements and handed them back their change with a warm and welcoming smile. Surprisingly, Ayaka was completely different from how she was at school. It also didn't look as though she was putting on an act, but rather it seemed as though she was actually happier here than she would be at school. But that's enough of assessing Ayaka, since Kazuma also needed to make sure he didn't get in her way at all today. As the evening came and things began settling down at the cafe, Ayaka lay slumped over their counter, feeling utterly exhausted. Curious, Kazuma asked if there were always this many customers during lunchtime. And apparently, that seemed to be the case, but it always calmed down during the evenings and onward. And it's then that he wanted to ask if she was actually a part of the dance club and how rough it must be for her to juggle both work and school. But springing up from the counter, she confessed with a smile that she wouldn't mess up since she was a genius, after all. But now it was her turn to ask a question. She wondered if maybe this was his first part-time job. Although she wasn't able to tell because of how quickly he was moving, but all Kazuma really cared about was not getting in her way. But she insisted that he hadn't at all. In fact, she should actually be thanking him. But then she quickly came to her senses and decided to put everything on hold since she had been getting close with her enemy. But Kazuma didn't even know why they were feuding, and it was simply because he had cut ties with Ryua, so it should have been obvious. And although that might be true, as for Ayaka and her friends, he actually held no grudge against them. But what about that time he suddenly got angry during karaoke? How it must have been because he hated all her friends and herself as well. But again, he confessed that he didn't and figured that it must have been because of that pig Ryua why she still thought that way. And when she finally realized it, she wanted to clarify if this pig he spoke of would indeed be Ryua. And it was true, she used to follow Ryua's orders, but before she could even finish her thought, it didn't seem to matter to Kazuma anymore, since all that mattered now was that he thought of her differently, genuinely respecting her. She was efficient and careful with her work, and that's why from now on he would like it if she could teach him. And as she stood there in silence, she finally agreed to help him. From this moment on, she would give her best, so he had better be ready. Grateful, he bowed before her. Though a lingering question pressed on her mind about the man they had seen earlier. Apparently, during the visit of their last male customer, Kazuma had decided to intervene. He mentioned wanting to ensure the customers had a great experience, but she already saw through his lies. She had been watching him the entire day, so she knew it wasn't like him to interfere with her work. And as he stood there, he thought for a while. He asked if she had realized that very same customer was following her around. He was also a pickpocket who kept putting his hands in his pocket unnaturally, not to mention those suspicious eyes of his. And it seemed Ayaka also had a strange feeling about this guy. But if that was the case, Kazuma asked why she didn't kick him out. As where did all that toughness she had at school go? And as she stood there, trying to get her words out, she mentioned that it was because he was a customer. So, she couldn't possibly say that. But he thought she was taking it way too seriously, and if she ever saw him again, she should let him know so he could take care of it. She whispered a heartfelt, "Thank you," under her breath. And as she came a little closer to him, she noticed how kind he was, but was interrupted when another customer had entered the store. And as Ayaka turned to welcome them, it was none other than Amyun cheerfully entering while calling out to Kazuma. She had heard he was working part-time and wanted to stop by. But then Amyun noticed something, since that person standing beside Kazuma looked really familiar, almost as if she had seen them somewhere before. And Kazuma picked up immediately. Ayaka had completely frozen up. As it seemed, she really didn't want other people from school finding out about her job, and mentioned that it was probably just Amyun's imagination. Also, he asked if Ayaka didn't have something she wanted to do around the back, and she gladly took that excuse to get out of there. As time went on, Kazuma placed a cream soda down and apologized for the wait while Amyun cheerfully thanked him for her order. She couldn't help but notice how beautiful the restaurant was. She had some important work to do today, and since she derived all her motivation from Kazuma, she asked her manager for some extra time. Sure, the cream soda was delicious, but she really just wanted to see her man in a tuxedo. And with another bite, she couldn't help but mention how happy she was in that moment. And that's really all that Kazuma needed to hear. It seemed as if her voice acting work had been going well. And apparently, the 3 main voice actors had also been decided. But speaking of which, Amyun asked if Ryua had stopped by the cafe yet. But Kazuma actually hadn't told anyone about his new job, but still, it all just felt suspicious. Ryua had been silent for about 2 weeks now, and it was definitely rare for such a famous person as herself to go on such a long break. Maybe she was actually plotting something, and MAnwha found it all strange. Regardless, she warned Kazuma to please be careful, and shortly after noticed how late it had gotten. And as she stood to her feet, she ran over to Kazuma, leaping into his arms, hugging him tightly. And as he called out to her, she mentioned being fully recharged and filled with energy and made her way over towards the exit, thanking him for the meal. And it seemed MAnwha had truly been shining brightly, breaking free of guilt and her old workplace. And it all just reminded her of that day he was able to take himself back. But just like MAnwha said, if Ryua were to try something again, and if anything were to happen, he'd be ready. But hiding somewhere around the back while peeking in, Ayaka couldn't help but wonder what was going on. She asked herself what kind of relationship they could have, and that Minato MAnwha, that girl from her school, well, she was supposed to be a voice actress. Come to think of it, Ayaka did remember hearing some rumors that she was close friends with Kazuma, but she just hadn't believed it. But not only that, but they did really look good together. And she was sure Kazuma just didn't think about her. As she sat there, saddened and alone on the floor, it seemed like Kazuma really was a good guy after all. But now, streaming on YouTube, Ryua welcomed everyone for joining. Apparently, a close friend of hers had told her recently that the most important thing is to always try your best. She wanted to think about it seriously. So, she reflected on it a lot and then asked herself what she could possibly do to help the people around her. And that's when she realized she should be using her strength to speak up for others. So, she told her grandfather about this great idea of hers, and he decided to lend a hand. And since her grandpa was now on board, starting tomorrow, she would be going on a 2-day trip with him. But not only that, she would also be trying her best to be a good granddaughter, and decided that they should all work really hard together, and said her goodbyes by logging off for the day.